of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, President Trump puts the squeeze on China, following up on a Truth Social post this morning by announcing today an additional 100% tariff on Chinese goods, along with new export controls starting next month. The president earlier putting his planned meeting with Chinese President Xi in doubt. We'll have more on the story and the market reaction coming up as the S&P and NASDAQ mark their worst days since April, now moving lower in futures trading. Plus, 4 words hitting Washington. The rifts have begun. The announcement from Budget Director Ross Vought today as the Senate gavels out of session and heads home following half a dozen votes to reopen the government this week, all ending in failure. What's next in the shutdown? And more on the Trump-Beijing front when Democratic Congresswoman and member of the China Select Committee Haley Stevens joins us up ahead. Israel also pulling back its troops now in Gaza as the clock starts on the release of hostages. The 72-hour window ticking down for Hamas to return all remaining hostages. And what awaits the millions of displaced Gazans looking to return home as the process of ending the 2-year war gets underway. What comes next is the president finds himself on the verge of heading to the Middle East, where we speak with Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. We begin this evening with the latest, though, from the White House. The president kicking off a day of market turmoil and a lengthy social post aimed at Chinese President Xi, and doubling down just moments ago before we came to air in a new Truth Social post, saying, quote, starting November 1st, the United States of America will impose a 100% tariff on China over and above any tariff they are currently paying. That doubling down coming just 6 hours after the president threatened a, quote, massive increase of tariffs on Chinese products coming into the U.S., while adding, quote, I was to meet President Xi in 2 weeks at APEC in South Korea. But now there seems to be no reason to do so. The post rocked markets, marking the worst day coming in a month, coming as the president convenes a White House event on drug pricing set to take place just moments from now. We're going to have eyes on this, touting a deal with pharma giant AstraZeneca that could see drug prices heading lower. We've got that and a lot more with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw here with me now in Washington. I want to start with you on what we just heard from China. We thought maybe this was some bluster, maybe a taco trade underway on Wall Street. The market certainly took it seriously, and now 100% tariff. If that's over and beyond anything else that China is already paying, does that immediately sever our economic relationship?
I mean, it's sort of hard to understand how that actually works in practice, given how reliant the U.S. is on China for a whole wide range of goods and across basically a whole number of different sectors. Yeah. So, yeah, it's clearly a very serious threat if he follows through with it. And it seems to be a reaction to a letter we still really haven't seen from China, which appears to be talking about some kind of export controls that they plan to impose on a lot of goods. So, it seems that he is amping up very seriously to try to head this off and to try to not have it take place. So there's a bit of a question about how can he actually follow through on this kind of threat? Is that even plausible? And what would that mean? It's not really clear how that works. We've seen him do this before. Mm-hmm. You threaten, and then you walk back to sort of where the ground, where you started from.
This feels like a little more than a threat, since this would take effect before the meeting, right? So should we assume this meeting is canceled or on the rocks? How would we describe it?
I mean, I would say that he said he didn't see a reason to meet. Yeah. And obviously what he's trying to say is take away whatever you just threatened, and then we'll get back and have a conversation. Mm-hmm. So on some level, he's trying to put the ball in China's court right now, and they need to decide whether they want to actually have this fight and have this escalation and have this level of break or not. But I do think you watched the markets today wake up once again to the fact that this trade war is real, it is happening, and it's just a question of to what.
And while we had a truce with China, we don't have a deal, which is pretty interesting to consider what might happen next in this case. These are obviously the world's 2 biggest economies. Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw in Washington. Kevin, thank you so much. After the president's post this morning, flaring trade tensions between the U.S. and China sent shockwaves, as you've been hearing, across markets. You may have felt that yourself, hammering stocks, oil, crypto, and more, while spurring a dash for the perceived safety of treasuries and gold. Here's how analysts on Bloomberg were watching today's movement unfold.
I think the narrative of this tariff volatility and uncertainty is bad news for the whole space.
You will bring back a lot more volatility into the markets. I think there will be concerns on both sides, both countries linked to China and Chinese exports.
If you ask me, I think there's some short-term leverage game playing here, but there's also long-term game playing by the Chinese.
Let's turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld, who joins us from World Headquarters in New York. Things changed pretty quick this morning, Katie, and they don't seem to be getting any better after the bell.
No, not at all. Kevin makes a good point that markets and traders are paying attention. We have the after hours board behind me of what's going on in an S&P 500 ETF and a NASDAQ 100 ETF. You can see for the S&P 500 down another 0.7%. The Q's down about 0.6%. And this is pretty noteworthy given that it was such a brutal normal cash trading session. If you take a look at how the S&P 500 performed, down about 2.7% in normal trading. Even worse for the NASDAQ 100, down 3.5%. That's where all of those chip makers live. You can see that in the Philadelphia Semiconductors Index as well. For the S&P 500, for the NASDAQ 100, this was the worst single-day performance in 6 months since actually those tariff ructions in April. So sort of a round-trip moment here. But what the good news is that your traditional hedges did work pretty well today, Joe. If you take a look at how bond markets reacted, you saw Treasury yields on the long end of the Treasury curve moving sharply lower, now down almost 11 basis points. So traders really piling into Treasuries, as you say. You can see also that gold got another bid. We know that the yellow metal has been on a record tear. It continued today, gold moving about 1% higher as volatility really came back in a big way into the equity market. You take a look at the VIX behind me, trading with a 21 handle. It's up 5 vol points right now. It's not too often that you see a move like that, but I do want to highlight some of the moves that we saw in agricultures, in commodities as well. We know that soybeans have been a big issue here when it comes to whether or not the Chinese are going to start buying American soybeans again. That is one of the non-tariff issues that's being discussed. Soybean futures coming down pretty sharply after we got that initial Truth Social post from the president. Copper, too, down today. So it had been an buy everything rally, Joe, but certainly anything with any sort of a risk profile was sold off on the day.
Boy, isn't that right? Great readout from Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld. Thank you, Katie, so much. Joining us now with her insights on the Trump-Xi relationship and the economic ties between our two countries. Mary Lovely, senior fellow at the Peterson Institute of International Economics, an expert on U.S.-China relations. It's great to see you. The first call we made when we heard about this, Mary, I'm not sure how you're reading this because President Trump, as we've established already, is known for bluster, certainly before a meeting. The markets, though, think they just got a big reality check. Now, suddenly, we do care about trade with China. Do you see this as the actual decoupling that we've been talking about?
I don't think it's the actual decoupling, but I think some of us have been a bit mystified as to why the markets have been so sanguine all along. Many of the deals, even with our allies, are still basically unsettled. And we've been expecting this one to not just be a smooth ride to, you know, happiness with some lower level of tariffs. So it was a very precipitous, but not entirely unexpected.
So we haven't heard, as far as I know, anything formal in response from Beijing to the post this morning or now this 100% tariff move. Do you suspect that the meeting is as good as canceled now, or does this draw President Xi to talks with Trump?
Well, obviously, we're seeing tit for tat in a different way. During Trump 1 with the trade war, we saw tit for tat on tariff rates. Yep. Now we're seeing a whole host of commercial relations being put to the test. You know, the U.S. has fees on ships, Chinese ships that land on U.S. ports. China has now just fees on American ships. We have export controls. They have export controls. We have tariffs. They have tariffs. We have placed a number of their companies on entity lists. American companies can't do business with them except with certain permissions. China has done the same. So I think China has learned how to play this game, and President Trump knows that. He has said himself that he thinks the U.S. has 3 times, you know, the firepower that the Chinese do. Many people don't think that's true, not in the short run at least. We haven't really prepared for this. We're still dependent on China in many areas. And the Chinese here are speaking with their policies, not through their PR people.
Boy, it's pretty remarkable, the list that you just ticked through. You add now inspectors fanning out at ports across China to make sure that NVIDIA chips are not getting into the country. Are both sides just trying to tenderize each other ahead of talks, or are we moving further apart, I guess is the question.
So some analysts have been painting this as kind of, trying to each side trying to get a little bit more firepower going into the negotiations. Yep. I think that is true, but I think there's a whole lot more here at stake, Joe. I think that the national security concerns and the segment of the administration and the previous administration that really wanted to see reliance on China for particularly critical minerals reduced quickly, and seeing a whole host of relations with China severed. And the Chinese don't like that. They wanted to see export controls reduced, not increased. They wanted to see investment in the United States eased, not made more difficult. And they're signaling that pretty clearly with this. So the national security issues here, I think, are really coming to the fore. Unfortunately, in the U.S., we don't have any clarity on how this struggle within is going to work out. So we have the bilateral, and then we have what's going on inside the United States.
I want to ask you about something in that very long missive from the president on Truth Social this morning. More than 500 words. Right in the middle of it, he refers to peace in the Middle East. The timing of these letters on rare earths going out. He says the letters were especially inappropriate, and this was the day that after 3,000 years of bedlam and fighting, there is peace in the Middle East. I wonder if that timing was coincidental. What did he mean by that?
I think that President Trump is getting ready to take a victory lap, and he certainly doesn't
that's all it was.
want any rain on his parade.
Why did you do it today? And he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. So that was his mood when he wrote this morning.
Yeah, well, you can never say that the Chinese didn't do it to rain on the parade, but I think that, we have been watching this for a long time, Joe, and having this conversation. So I think the timing may have been there, but clearly this is a long-standing issue. It's something that's very important to American businesses and Chinese businesses. And unfortunately, today was a dark day for us.
We are still technically in a trade truce, right? That's got a couple of more weeks on it when we remember the talks that took place overseas. Whatever happened to getting a 15% cut of NVIDIA and AMD sales to China? I thought we were on the verge of something.
Well, all of this has come up again, investment promises in the U.S., and we don't really have anything on paper. We don't have, the deals are not in place. Yeah. And I think this is what's keeping uncertainty in the markets so high. A lot of people are saying that economists have underestimated the agility of American markets. I don't think we have it all. I think that what we have been warning about, and is true, is that uncertainty makes it so difficult for firms to plan and to work around whatever it is that the government ends up doing. If President Trump goes through with 100% tariffs, and at the Peterson Institute we're estimating that the average tariff on China is about 50% already. So you can imagine 150%.
Yeah.
You are going to see, we talked in there earlier about, is it an end to trade? Yeah. We're already seeing enormous amounts of avoidance and evasion. And so it's just going to send these supply chains into real adaptation move with a lot of things happening that we really don't want to see in the global economy.
Are our West Coast ports about to go quiet again?
This would be devastating for the ports. Very big hit to the ports, and a lot of workers at those ports in warehousing and trucking and rail.
Just in time for the holidays. Mary, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Mary Lovely, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute of International Economics, with us in studio this evening. We'll have more on this story and the permanent layoffs that have begun to hit Washington when Democratic Congresswoman, member of the China Select Committee, Haley Stevens of Michigan, joins us up ahead. But first, Hamas now has less than 72 hours to return all remaining hostages. We'll discuss what happens next as the president prepares to embark on a trip to the region when we speak with Michael Oren, an important conversation with the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think the reality here is that we're not talking about peace. I think this is not a peace agreement. We may not even be talking about an inexorable end to the war in Gaza. That's going to depend on phase two, which involves many really difficult lifts on any number of issues. But right now, President of the United States and key Arab states have managed to create a break and a breakthrough in a war, which is now in its third year.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. That was Aaron David Miller, the senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment's Institute of Peace, talking with us about the state of play on the ground in Israel and Gaza as we await the return of the remaining hostages. To that end, Hamas now has less than 72 hours to fulfill its end of the agreement. We now have reports tonight U.S. troops have begun to arrive in Israel to facilitate a civilian military center to assist with the hostage returns. Joining us now with insight into what is about to happen next for Gaza, now that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the plan, is Bloomberg's Eric Martin, who covers geopolitics for us in Washington. It's great to see you, Eric. I know you've been all over this story, and this is a pretty important moment here as we see the president on his way. What will he witness, assuming that he is there for some of these hostage and prisoner exchanges? How will this all unfold?
Absolutely, Joe. Well, it's amazing how fast all of this has taken place. Yeah. We were just 1 week ago talking about Hamas having accepted the president's proposal. We saw at noon today in Israel, the noontime, the beginning of the clock in terms of the 72 hours for all of the hostages to be returned and released. But we really don't know a whole lot at this point about exactly what the president's agenda and his events in the region would look like. He had referred to the fact that he does expect to be going to the region. Of course, we've been seeing these negotiations taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and expectation around some kind of potential celebration of the accord, of the agreement being signed. But this is a landmark moment for this president, also looking to build on, and he's talked about trying to expand the Abraham Accords of his first term and looking at what the end of this war, the ceasefire, the return of the hostages, the withdrawal of the IDF to the yellow line will look like, and the kinds of opportunities that this can open overall in the region overall. This is a really important moment, and it's going to be also important, I think, the follow-through in the phase 2 of this in terms of coming up with what the government, a technocratic government in Gaza looks like, how does that get implemented, and how will all these things be put into place. And that's going to be equally hard work ahead in the following months.
So you put that together very nicely for us. Eric has traveled to the region repeatedly with the Secretary of State, and it's good to have you back, Eric Martin. With us now for more analysis is Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We have so many questions, and I'm going to guess that you probably do as well. But as the president embarks to the Middle East, I wonder what you're expecting in terms of the return of these hostages. We're told this will be Monday or Tuesday. Will these be formal exchanges? Will we see them occur?
Good to be with you, Joe. Thank you. Certainly, this is a great moment. The 20 points that were drafted by President Trump and his team, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, is an historic agreement. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago whether it would be possible, I probably expressed a great doubt. They got everybody on board with this. Countries that don't agree with one another, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Republic, even Emirates, even Pakistan and Indonesia, who don't necessarily agree with one another, certainly not with Israel, everybody together on these 20 points, which address not only the situation in Gaza, but the situation between Israel and Palestine generally, the entire region. Truly an historic document, a great work of elegant diplomacy. Now, can it work? Yeah. Can it work? And certainly maybe we know we're coming up to the 72-hour mark. That's the only, by the way, that's the only time mentioned in the entire document is those 72 hours. And the question is, will Hamas now comply with it? The Israeli army has complied. It has begun the withdrawal. It will complete the withdrawal to the lines that are agreed upon between Israel and the Trump administration. But there's still room for concern. Will Hamas come back and say, well, listen, we don't know where all 20 of those living hostages are. We don't know where all the deceased bodies are. And maybe this is a terrorist organization that deals not just with physical terror, but also with emotional and psychological terror. And if so, what will be the response of the administration? But beyond that, and I think that Eric and Aaron David Miller were all saying the same thing, the next stage is the crucial one. Everything hinges on whether Hamas can be demilitarized, whether Gaza can be demilitarized, and whether Hamas will give up its guns. And that's a very hard lift because Hamas is a terrorist organization. Without its guns, it's not Hamas anymore. And how that happens, without military pressure, without immense diplomatic pressure, remains an open question.
This is why it's been suggested on this program, in fact, by our analyst, Jeannie Shanzano, that what's being asked of Hamas is for it to sign its own death warrant when everyone sits at the table to formalize this. I don't know if you see it that way, but there is a question about what will be next in terms of transitional governing. There's been talk of Tony Blair being involved. Once we get to that point, and you're pointing to the hard part, when will you be convinced that this is a lasting peace?
Well, I myself have worked with Tony Blair on Gaza, and I know he's deeply committed to this. I think they're all deeply committed to this. But the question, again, is getting to give up those guns. Yes, it is a type of suicide for Hamas. What Hamas wants is to basically stay in Gaza, the way Hezbollah stays in Lebanon and keeps its guns, but doesn't have sovereign responsibility. Hamas doesn't want the responsibility for building Gaza, for example. It just wants to stay there with its weapons very quietly, or maybe not so quietly vis-a-vis Israel, and then use that international force as kind of a shield, the way Hezbollah used UNIFIL in southern Lebanon. And right now, they seem to be doing that. They have now said, they've announced that their security forces, i.e. the terrorists, have taken over positions that have been evacuated by the Israeli army. And now the Palestinian population is going back to Gaza City. It had been evacuated by Israel prior to combat operations there. So right now, Hamas has both a civilian shield and with now the introduction of these U.S. troops, a bit of an American shield. And that, again, it's going to be very difficult to overcome these challenges. It's not impossible. The president is, as you know, a keen negotiator. He has a great staff. And I'm sure they thought this through. And I'll be curious to see how exactly this is going to be executed.
Should we assume that the IDF has dismantled the network of tunnels beneath Gaza, which at one point was a goal before things were handed back over? And what does this mean for Benjamin Netanyahu's political career?
Two different questions. The answer to the first one is unequivocally no. We've destroyed about 50% of their tunnels. Remember, this is 500 kilometers of tunnels. It's bigger than the New York subway system. And it involves a tremendous amount of explosives. But also, we couldn't really just blow up all the tunnels because we didn't know where the hostages were. Now that the hostages are out, you could blow up the tunnels, but the IDF is not in those areas anymore. It's not in Gaza City. So Hamas will not only retain its guns for the time being, it'll retain its offensive infrastructure, which are these hundreds of kilometers of tunnels that still exist. As for the future of Benjamin Netanyahu, listen, I always say it's premature to eulogize him politically. He is the ultimate comeback king. And right now, at this moment, he is riding high. But if it's perceived that Hamas does survive this war and that Israel has achieved only one of the two goals that Benjamin Netanyahu himself set out for the war, which was to redeem the hostages, rescue the hostages, and destroy Hamas, then he'll have a tremendous political challenge ahead of him.
Yeah. I've only got a minute left, Ambassador. What happens to displaced Gazans once this peace takes hold?
Well, they're already streaming back. They're streaming back to Gaza. The question is, what are they coming back to, Joe? And they're coming back to a devastated area, a war-torn area. And that no international force, this is a very important point, and I hope I can get it in, is that no international force, inter-Arab, European, American, will go into Gaza as long as Hamas has guns. No one's going to die for Palestine or die for Israel either. And so, again, that is why the demilitarization is absolutely, absolutely key.
It's great to have you, sir. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. at a very sensitive moment. We'll be watching things unfold this weekend. And coming up next, we get back to our breaking news. President Trump announcing 100% additional tariffs on Chinese goods. This just happened. But first, permanent layoffs in Washington have begun as the government shutdown reaches now day 10. We'll discuss with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You've got millions of American families who will now have to figure out how to make their mortgage, how to cover their rent, pay the car note, keep food on the table, because Democrats, Chuck Schumer, and his colleagues in the Senate are here playing games. Republicans have voted over and over to end this madness and reopen the federal government. We did our job.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson this morning defending his party's position during this government shutdown. We made it to day 10. Now, the White House says it is making good on threats to fire thousands of federal workers as a result of the shutdown. Budget director at the White House, Russ Vought, confirming on social media, saying, quote, the rifts have begun, unquote. But it's the big news regarding China taking the lion's share of our attention this evening. Just before we came to air, the president announcing an additional 100% tariff will be placed on goods from China as soon as November 1st. We're going to have a member of the China Select Committee, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, with us in a few moments. But joining us now with his reaction live from New York is Marc, the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, Republican strategist and former congressional liaison in the first Trump administration. Marc, it's always great to have you. I want your take on the shutdown because I know this is very much in your wheelhouse, but this China news just rocked the markets not once but twice today. First, a Truth Social post this morning. Now the president doubling down with a 100% tariff and new export controls that will come with it. Do you take him at his word here? And is the meeting with Xi as good as canceled?
I don't know that it's canceled, Joe. I think that the president does this from a negotiation standpoint before the meeting to try to make a point. But I confess I also don't think that the trade policy toward China has been going well. I do think, as you and I have discussed before, that I think the first administration for President Trump was very focused on isolating China and rallying much of the global world as well as developed economies in Asia against China. I think with a haphazard tariff policy on all friend and foe alike, it has not isolated China. And right now, what you've seen so far of this administration in 9 months, despite the saber rattling, is China getting a huge win on TikTok when, that was law of the land, the Supreme Court confirmed, and China gets to maintain the algorithm sowing discontent among TikTok users across America. They've gotten an agreement to allow sales of NVIDIA chips into China. They've basically created a lot of consternation for the president among his base in the agricultural belt of America, those who are no longer getting purchases from China, their agricultural products. And so in a lot of ways, China's had the upper hand in the first 9 months. And I assume that the administration is pretty frustrated with that. But I don't think this means that it's over. I think that it means that this is the president trying to stake out a position before a meeting, honestly.
Well, I understand. So is this art of the deal, even as Wall Street tips over?
I mean, yes, I think this is consistent with what the president will often do. Like he'll often send out people, before he's looking to make a deal to go make more noise about send out some of the protectionists in his administration, often on the airwaves to do that. I think in this case he's taking to Twitter himself, but. Again, I don't think that it's been successful in the first 9 months. I do think the first administration was far more successful in rallying the globe against China. I feel like the second administration policy has not been as consistent, and I think that so far China's had the upper hand.
I'd love to ask you what's going on, not only on Capitol Hill, but elsewhere in the White House as the director of OMB, Russ Vought, makes good on the threat. He was, of course, portrayed in an AI video that the president posted as the Grim Reaper a couple days ago, and I suspect there are some federal employees who are referring to him as such this evening. The rifts have begun. We know thousands, Marc. We don't have a more specific number. There's also reporting that the Pentagon might be spared, so this is not every agency. How deep do you think these cuts will go, and what does it mean for the standoff on Capitol Hill in the throes of a shutdown?
Well, I certainly don't think it'll be every agency. I think the Pentagon will be protected. I imagine that Immigration, Customs Enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol will all be protected. I think that Russ is sincere about wanting to shrink the size of government and to reduce the workforce. I'm not so sure the president is there. I imagine that the president, again, is in some ways this is a negotiation tactic to try to force the Democrats to the table. But, Joe, I got to say that a couple weeks ago, I was very convinced that the Democrats initiated the shutdown. Republicans passed the legislation to fund the government. Democrats added extraneous issues to it, as Republicans have in the past. But I think that since the shutdown, the Democrats have been more consistent in their messaging about the need to extend the Obamacare subsidies. And the Republicans have been a little bit less consistent in their messaging, and some, such as Marjorie Taylor Greene, even advocating for the Obamacare subsidies. And so I think that the messaging war, in some ways, the Democrats are winning, even though I think they instigated the shutdown. I think that they're being more consistent in their messaging than the Republicans have been to date.
Fascinating. We're on day 10. Just before you leave us, Marc, Are you with most people in Washington who think this could be a record setter? Are we going to Thanksgiving or the end of the year or what?
I don't think it's going to be a record setter. I still feel like that many of these shutdowns have been over a disagreement over what the top line funding should be. In this case, there's not a lot of disagreement on that. It's that the Democrats have brought in a separate issue that many Republicans, I think, unfortunately support. I think that Democrats were shrewd in the beginning of Obamacare to say, look, we're going to buy off insurance companies by promising them subsidies to get their support on this bill. And here we are years later, and all we keep doing is extending the subsidies. I mean, the baseline bill of Obamacare is 400% above poverty level gets subsidies. And then during COVID, that was extended and added above and beyond that. And so it's like, at some point you think maybe government-run healthcare isn't the most efficient way to do this, and maybe it does bankrupt the system. But the reality is that there's a lot of Republicans who are actually in favor of extending these subsidies. And so I think ultimately that's going to be the pathway to getting a deal, particularly as you get closer and closer to November 1st and premiums going out. And I think the other thing, Joe, is keep in mind that come the 15th of October is when the military gets paid. And when those paychecks don't go out, I think there'll be even more pressure for Congress to actually get a deal done.
Maybe it feels a little bit different by the middle of next week. Marc Short, great to have you back. Former Chief of Staff, Vice President Mike Pence, Republican strategist, with us here on Balance of Power. Joining us now for more, Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan. She is co-chair of the Congressional Hostage Task Force and also a member of the China Select Committee. And Congresswoman, it's good to see you. It's been a minute. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I will warn you in advance that we are expecting to hear some remarks from the president in the Oval Office, and I hope to not have to interrupt our conversation. But I'd like to start with you on matters involving China, central to your role on the China Select Committee. 100% additional tariff. Is this bluster or the end of our economic relationship?
Well, I'll say this. I introduced legislation that I call Unearth America's Future Act. It's legislation based off the CHIPS and Science Act to bring processing and refining of critical minerals and rare earth elements here to the United States of America. This is a major component of our supply chain, and yet we ceded all the ground to China, and we're very dependent on them. And so Donald Trump's approach isn't going to totally get us out of it. The wild, chaotic, erratic tariffs that just react to everything. We had 55 tariff announcements in 100 days, which are also causing our prices to just rise on everyday goods, including groceries, which is also why I wrote a bill called No Tariffs on Groceries Act. So I'd really like for us to consider my legislation on critical minerals. I think it's a good opportunity and a good time, even though I'm in the minority party, for us to do and get back to real industrial policy.
It's interesting that you mention critical minerals. Rare earths are such an important part of the story today. This is, of course, what prompted President Trump's response to China. One of the stocks today that actually rallied, one of the biggest gainers on Wall Street, was a company called MP Materials, which the Pentagon, the government, recently took a stake in the name of national security. Congresswoman, do we need more deals like this?
Well, I don't trade stock, and I never have as an elected official. But I would
no, in terms of a government stake in these companies, I mean.
Well, public-private partnerships have got some opportunity for us, and certainly as someone who served as chief of staff on the U.S. Auto Rescue, we did take a stake in these companies during their downturn, and we didn't control the day-to-day management of them. When I look at big tech and big AI companies, there's questions around why, particularly for artificial intelligence, some of the big dogs in the room haven't gone public. And there's also public goods that get utilized. We're going to start seeing larger fights over data centers. There's obviously a lot of money surrounding that. Here in Michigan, our hydropower capabilities are going to come into question. And yet we also have very old water pipes in my state. And who's going to pay for the fixing of 100-year-old pipes? I don't want to saddle my consumers with that. So some of those public-private partnerships could be interesting arrangements. I certainly support loan guarantees and tax credits and the like, and a reawakening of American industry in places where we've ceded ground to China. In the rare earth space, 95%, is being sent over there in some cases. The processing and refining that's taking place over there, that's inexcusable. we've got people who want to access those jobs and to have lower cost, and we shouldn't be wholly reliant on China.
Congresswoman, let's talk shutdown for a moment. We're 10 days in. The House is not in session, though I know a lot of lawmakers have chosen to stay here, I guess presumably in case there's something about to happen. I'm sure you have very serious thoughts about this. It's also worth noting that you're running for Senate, and that's where this story lies at the moment. Would you consider, as a Democrat, if you were in the Senate now, if you actually win this election, would this be a time to join the other 3 Democrats in voting to reopen the government?
Look, I've done my part in the House, and I did vote alongside the people of Michigan and their pocketbooks. I'll be very clear with you. We are in a healthcare crisis, and the responsibility of this moment is with the governing party. And what they are not doing is working in a very reasonable way with the other side of the aisle to keep the government funded. And the people who are paying the price are Michiganders. And I see this everywhere I go. The rising costs of food, that is, grocery bills that are going on credit cards, 700,000 Michiganders who are going to lose their health care when these Medicaid cuts go into effect, and notices that were given in the summer from this tax bill to Michiganders about their health care coverage and their benefits. And look, it's not acceptable. People can't afford more.
Do you need a promise for a vote or an actual deal with a timeline on the extension of Obamacare subsidies to warm up to the CR?
This is not how we should be negotiating. Clearly, this extenuating circumstance, and your previous speaker also just admitted that the Democrats are making a point, and the Republicans and the administration should come to the table. This is how budgets were passed for the last 4 years, and we do need to be protecting the pocketbooks of Americans. I feel very strongly about what's happening in Michigan right now. We've got rising unemployment, and I will tell you, as a senator, I will always cut the best deal for Michigan. Mike Rogers, who I'm running against, he wants to rubber stamp Donald Trump. I want to rubber stamp my state and get Michigan what they deserve.
The Office of Personnel Management says that Michigan has just over 27,405, in fact, civilian federal employees. When you hear thousands of layoffs, permanent layoffs, Congresswoman, what does this mean for Michigan? Are you getting any contact from the administration on this?
Well, I have a very close relationship with the American Federal Workers Union, AFGE, and I will tell you that I am taking my cues from them, because these illegal firings, they said, will be met with lawsuits. And I can't for the life of me understand why firing 200,000 people, not lowering our debt as a result of that, is a bragging point for this administration. Is that
the number you're hearing? Is it 200,000 people, Congresswoman?
That's who's been fired thus far.
I understand.
Yeah, under Doge, and that's been their bragging point. And now what we are seeing are potentially more layoffs. And I am hearing from federal employees, and they want their pocketbook protected. They certainly take a lot of pride in their work. We know that very well here in Michigan. A lot of folks take pride in the making and production and agricultural sector that we have here in this state. And it's another reason why I'm putting up my hand to run for United States Senate in this moment, because frankly, the dignity of work for Michiganders needs to be restored at the lawmaking table.
Come see us when you get back to town. Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan with us on Balance of Power. We thank you. Coming up, New York Attorney General Letitia James, indicted by a federal grand jury yesterday, now reports a former Trump official may be next. Who and when, coming up when we convene our political panel on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us here on the Friday edition with two major stories breaking and consuming our attention today in Washington. The first, massive layoffs announced, the RIFs, as Russ Vought calls them, from the Office of Management and Budget, now on day 10 of the government shutdown. Those threats to lay off furloughed workers have become true. We're still waiting for a final number and the actual agencies that are impacted, but reports suggest the Pentagon at least will be spared. We add another doozy to the list in our top story this evening, 100% additional tariffs on goods from China. President Trump opening the day with a threatening Truth Social post and making good on those threats now to impose tariffs and export controls starting next month. Joining us now with more on both this evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, and Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. It's great to have you both here. Rick, I don't know what we make of the timing on all of this, but just before the president heads to the Middle East, 100% tariffs. We're asking questions like, is this the end of our economic relationship with China? Or is this art of the deal? Is this the latest taco trade? How do we look at it?
Could be all those things.
Okay.
You never underestimate what's going to happen at the White House these days.
Yeah.
He made good this afternoon, doubled down on the threats that he made earlier this morning that rocked the market so badly.
Yep.
I think that you can anticipate at least this being a negotiating tactic for a potential meeting in South Korea later this month. But the reality is he's made threats like this before against China. Mm-hmm. He's not fully implemented them. They've been a part of a negotiation that seems to have broken down, and which is our only conclusion based on the current statements by the president. And the question is, can it all be put back together?
Right.
Unlikely, because I think this administration is embarking upon a strategy of trying to isolate China and push back on the limitations that China's putting on our technology access.
That's right. Well, it has been quite a tit for tat here, Jeannie. And I'm curious your thoughts on what comes next here with clearly either a trade war or the end of a trade relationship. And unless this is some sort of bluster, Wall Street is not taking it that way. And we know how the president feels about the stock market. He's been referring to its action quite a bit recently when he says that America is the hottest country in the world. If we get a big flush out, say on Monday, in response to this story, will that change his tune?
You know, I'm not sure how he'll respond to that, but I do think this is concerning. I think I'm more concerned about the president's response, because what China did was not at all surprising. Just a few days ago, you had members of the U.S. Senate and members of Congress talking about imposing more regulations on China. They responded in kind, and their regulations are not set to go into fruition until November. It was clearly an attempt on their part to try to gain some leverage in these talks. And as opposed to responding in kind, the president has this bizarre Truth Social that ran on, and this imposition of these 100% tariffs. It just doesn't seem like a sound way to respond to something from Beijing that was not at all surprising, and in fact mimicked to a good extent what the United States has done to China already. And so that is my concern. And of course, the market is right to respond in the way they did. And hopefully this is the president's blustering as he goes in for leverage on the talks. But my concern is that the talks are held and they are productive.
Let's turn to the layoffs here. The three scary words in Washington today. The RIFs have begun. RIFs, I guess, are a word now around here if you're a wonk. Reductions in force. The president has threatened this. I don't think anybody in Washington actually thought it was going to happen until that tweet dropped today. What does that mean for the standoff on Capitol Hill? I'm guessing this does not impress Democrats.
Yeah, I would say, Joe, Republicans thought this would happen. When the initial government shutdown occurred, most Republicans I was talking to were very concerned that this was going to give leverage to Russ Vought, the OMB director, to do what he wants to do and has predicted that he would do, which is continuing to shrink the size of the government workplace. And so this is just an execution on a plan. This might have been happening regardless of having a government shutdown. So I don't think it's actually a surprise. The question is now, as we learn more about what agencies are affected, what programs within those agencies, I think you will find, as we learn more, is that a lot of this reduction in force is attacking programs that the government doesn't like within those agencies. And so it won't be across the board, but more of a surgical effort to try and change what those government agencies do.
So follow the breadcrumbs for us here a little bit, Jeannie. The president has continued to say that he's going to cut Democrat programs, as he puts it, and has even suggested Democrat agencies. And I'm not sure what exactly those are. When you put that together with thousands of layoffs that are not going to hit the Pentagon, where's this all going to fall?
Yeah, I think that's what we're all waiting with bated breath to find out, and leave it to Washington, Joe, to come up with an acronym for firing people. Reduction in force. That's a new one. I think that's what we're all waiting to see, where these cuts hit. And I think politically, a lot of this is going to depend on how this is messaged. When we think back to the early parts of this administration and the DOGE cuts, we talked an awful lot about the truth that many Americans agree that we need to do a better job delivering services for the American public and making sure that the workforce, the federal workforce, is nimble, that we are not overspending, and all of that makes sense. But what you're hearing, at least so far, and again, we're early in the messaging on these firings, is that this is more retribution. This is more about getting rid of people who have priorities that differ from the administration, Democrats, hitting blue states with these cuts. That's not going to be a winning message. And so I think a lot of it's going to depend on how this is messaged, because the cuts are going to hit red districts just as hard as they will hit blue districts, if not worse.
Bloomberg reporting that Health and Human Services and Commerce started layoffs today. Are those Democratic agencies?
Yeah, I think that if you look at the traditional field of play, right? We used to say if you're talking about health care, you're on the Democrats' field of play. Okay, got it. That's the way that, in a very gross generality, Republicans think about some of these issues. To say that MAGA isn't exactly a carbon copy of the Republican policy groups that that I was willing to admit to. In fact, it's incredible to hear a Democratic congresswoman from Michigan running for senator agreeing with the industrial policy of a Republican president she opposes. Amazing. The world is turned upside down. But yeah, I think that we need to understand too that they're following a process. I've been through, on behalf of the White House, reductions in forces at HHS. It's not easy to do. You have to notify people that they're going to be riffed. They have then a process of 60 days to get to go through, to appeal that. And so nothing's done until it's done.
I hope we get some details next week, because we've got a lot of questions still. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana will help us sort it out. Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. Have a great weekend. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.